Alright, so, welcome. This is episode 18 of the More Knowledge Show. It's been quite a while, just like the last time, which was 2 weeks ago. Which, the last time I made an episode, it was also 2 weeks after the other time I made an episode. And the last time I made an episode, I also said at the end, I would see you next week. And that ended up being a lie. So, I apologize for that. But, I do have an explanation. Okay, so, this past week, in fact, I don't really have a good explanation. I could try to make an excuse, but it doesn't sound really good. Okay, seriously. There's a military jet flying over. They're probably trying to bomb my position because they know I'm about to say a bunch of things that they do not want me to tell people. And I mean, this right here is just proof that they do not want me to say these things. And if they don't want me to say these things, then I must be saying something true. Because they obviously do not want you guys to hear it. That is why there is a fighter jet flying above my house. Okay, seriously, what is that noise? That does not sound good. Alright, I think it's gone. Wait, no. Alright, guys. Anyway, so if I was to try to make an excuse, what I would basically say is, we've had a lot of stuff with school, a lot of tests and all that type of stuff. And the way I kind of view it is your brain only has so much space to solve problems. So, you can use your brain to solve a certain number of problems, okay? And if I'm using my brain so much to solve problems about school, I don't have enough capacity to sit there and think about our entire world and put things together. So as a result, I'm unable to make a More Knowledge Show because my brain is being taken up by school. And that's why it's important to take out everything unimportant so you have as much brain space as possible to use on the important things. But I was just overwhelmed, so I couldn't make a More Knowledge Show. But that's not really a good excuse because, I mean, who cares? That's not even real. But anyway, we're back, and hopefully we do not have to make any more excuses for why we missed 2 weeks without making an episode. I'm sure you guys are just terribly upset at me. Hopefully you will accept my apology. But anyway, who cares about that? Let's get started. So, we're going to start off talking about the markets, as always, because that's our favorite thing to talk about here. At least from my perspective, that's probably one of my favorite things to talk about. And the reason why, if you don't know, the reason why I like talking about markets, because I believe if you can see where the money's heading and how money is moving, you can kind of predict the future. I think that's the best way to predict the future. A lot of people, they try to read people's palms, or they try to do all these things to predict the future. I think the best way to predict the future is to see where the money's heading. I think that can tell you a lot. And right now, from the markets, the financial markets, that's probably the best way to view where the money's heading. But of course, there's a lot of money that's moving around that you can't see in the financial markets. In fact, some of the most important stuff is not shown on the financial markets. So of course, this is not the whole story, but this is what I can easily look at and kind of tell y'all, kind of get like a snapshot of our world. So it's more than just, here's what I think will happen with stocks. It's about the entire world. It's much bigger than stocks. So I'm using money flows to make predictions about our world, which is something that I think is kind of a new well, it's not really a new thing, but it's something that's not used enough, because I think it can tell you a lot. In fact, you can use money flows. I saw this one guy talking about how you could have looked at how money was moving, and you could have even predict terrorist attacks just by seeing where money is moving, because sometimes terrorists or people connected with terrorists who know that an attack is going to happen are going to make certain trades to try to capitalize on these terrorist attacks. So I think if we do this more, if we focus more on what's going on in the financial markets, we can really like get a deep insight into what's going on behind the scenes. All right, it's always important. Do not focus on what they say, focus on what they do. And a lot of times what they're doing is being shown right to you, but we're too fixated on words and not numbers. And the answers are usually in numbers. Words lie, numbers do not lie. Well, they can lie, but I trust numbers more than I trust words. That's just my opinion. But anyway, the stock market. Let's get started with that. So this past week, stocks were up like a little bit under 1%. I mean, it was kind of mixed. There was some up days, some down days. Some days were just kind of flat. But overall, I guess you could say stocks were up this week. Stocks are not very far from their all-time highs. The S&P 500 is not far from its all-time highs. And I guess you can say there are three things that are making people bullish about the stock market. Okay, number one, earnings are looking better than expected. Number two, you have trade optimism. This is, it's the usual story. I've went in depth with the trade war so many times, but yeah, you have trade optimism. And number three, the Federal Reserve and central banks across the globe are using their monetary tools to stimulate the financial system. So they're pumping in liquidity. And those three things are making people want to be bullish. And here are my problems with those three things. First, earnings. Okay, earnings are better than expected, but earnings also aren't great. Okay, so just because earnings are better than expected does not mean that they're great, because the projections for earnings going in were very, very low, and then they beat very, very low projections, but that still does not mean that they're good. Just because you can jump over a 2-inch bar does not mean you're a great jumper. So that's kind of my view about earnings. Now, I'm not saying that stocks should be down because of earnings. I'm just saying that there's no reason to be overly optimistic from what we're seeing from these earnings reports, because we're seeing mixed stories. We're seeing some companies reporting great earnings, like Tesla reported great earnings, Microsoft reported pretty good earnings, but then we also see companies like Caterpillar, important bellwether companies that are giving us reason to worry. But so it's not all around bad, and it's not all around great. But over time, I think as the economy gets worse, earnings will take a hit, and that hasn't changed. Nothing from this earnings season has changed my view on that. So it's nothing to really get all amped up about it. I don't think markets are getting amped up about it, but I think it's in some people's mind a reason to be bullish on stocks, because it's just showing that the economy is not as bad as maybe some people have been saying. Because if companies are beating earnings, then it must be great. Okay. Second, trade optimism. I forgot what was going on with the trade war the last time I talked to you guys. But yeah, so we've been hearing all these reports about how they're accomplishing some things for this phase 1 trade deal, and all of it is just nonsense. I'm just being honest, because we've heard this before. All right, we've heard this before, and we already know what the story is. Okay, they may be able to agree on agriculture purchases. Maybe they can make small agreements when it comes down to intellectual property, but at its core, the trade war is not going to be solvable, because the trade war is all about changing the Chinese economic and government completely. They want to change the Chinese government, and the Chinese government is not willing to do that. So they may be able to come to small agreements, and markets are going to celebrate. But if you're looking at the bigger picture, there is no reason to be optimistic about the trade war. It's only going to get worse as the negotiations. Okay. All right. Anyway, it's only going to get worse as the negotiations shift from agricultural purchases to state-owned enterprises and stuff like that. Stuff that the Chinese government is not going to be willing to budge on at all, because after all, the Chinese is like an authoritarian government. I mean, this government is pretty extreme, and we're not just going to be able to change it. We don't have that much power or leverage over the Chinese economy to force them into just doing whatever we want them to do. And I think this may end up hurting America's credibility and America's view in the world in the long run. So yeah, trade optimism, I think that is one thing. People still think that this trade deal is possible, and that's another reason why people are bullish. And the third reason why people are bullish is this idea of do not fight the Fed. All right, the Fed is stimulating using monetary policy. You should buy stocks. Okay, if the Fed is lowering rates and pumping in money, you should buy stocks. And I think that this logic is completely backwards. Okay, because here's the deal: if the Federal Reserve is pumping money into the system, they are indirectly telling you something is terribly wrong. And they're not just pumping money in, like, they're increasing the amount of money that they're pumping into the system. They're not doing a short fix, okay? This is like something is internally wrong, that they need to put the entire financial system on life support. And no market or no economy that's ran on life support or constant stimulus will survive. Historically, simply just does not work like that. You can't just print money and pump it in and then keep things going forever. That's how it works, okay? But people have forgotten that. People think that you can, and people think that, the Federal Reserve pumping money into the markets is bullish. Maybe in the short term, but in the long run, which is what I say the long run a lot, because that's what's important. That's what we're focused on. That's how, if you're investing your money, you should be focused on the long run. So that's one thing that's a lot of people like to claim they're long-term investors, but they try to trade all the time. They constantly try to make short-term predictions, and the Federal Reserve is printing money. This is great for stocks. Maybe in the next month, this will help push stocks up. But what it's telling you is that there is an internal issue, and the fact that they're basically saying they're going to print money forever shows that this internal issue will not go away. It's probably going to get worse, and eventually is going to bring the entire thing down. So that's 3 reasons that people are bullish, and the reasons are all pretty terrible. Now, what are the reasons for why to be bearish? Okay, well, for one thing, you have these 3 dynamics going on. You have increasing debt. The United States annual budget deficit just released, I think, not a few days ago, was the biggest since 2012. So debt, leverage, these things that are pretty bad overall are increasing. You have that. You have slowing economic growth, which is just making the debt worse, making it more harder to sustain. And then third, you have increased political instability and political uncertainty. So those 3 things are all legitimate. I don't think you can refute or argue against any of them. Those are the 3 reasons to be bearish. They're getting much less focused than the 3 reasons to be bullish. But the 3 reasons to be bullish are complete garbage. Okay? So what you're seeing here is the markets, once again, as usual, there's a divergence between what the markets are saying and what's actually happening. And this divergence will continue to get bigger until it can't no more. And the only way for this divergence to be corrected is with a crash. So, yeah, as usual, you can say things different ways. You can bring in different things, but I come down to the same conclusion. The markets are not healthy, and they're eventually going to have a major correction. It's the same conclusion. It hasn't changed, but in some people's minds, things are changing rapidly every day. Yes, if all you do is just watch the mainstream TV, then yeah, it will seem like maybe things have gotten so much better in one day because we heard a report from the White House that some agreements have been made about the trade war. It may appear that things have just gotten so much better, but they haven't, okay? These long-term problems are not going to be solved overnight. And if you think that overnight, that one tweet or one news report or one statement by China or the US is going to solve all of these problems, you are completely out of it. No offense, okay? Because a lot of us are completely out of it. I mean, in some cases, I am too, okay? But you're like very out of it, and you need to get back in the realm of common sense. Otherwise, it's going to be a rough ride for you. Anyway, the next topic I want to talk about is the increasing protests around the world. This kind of goes with our increasing political uncertainty or political instability. But yeah, we're seeing increasing protests. It's not just Hong Kong. You hear about Hong Kong a lot, but you also got protests in Chile, whatever. Catalonia, Iraq, Lebanon, you're seeing protests. In the UK, you're seeing protests about Brexit. So you're seeing protests all over the world. They're increasing in violence, and they're all kind of for the same reasons. They're attacking the elites. There's this belief that the system is not working for people properly. The system is not serving people in the way it was promised. All right, you have, they're against the government. The government is corrupt. The government's colluding with people so a small group of people benefit and everyone else completely suffers. And that's true. That's been happening, okay? The government for a long time has been working to enrich a small group of people. And that's wrong. All right? What people are saying is, for example, in the financial crisis, you're seeing a bunch of people that caused the financial crisis doing stupid things that really benefited nobody, and they ended up being rewarded for doing that at the end. Okay, they ended up getting a bailout. They got money. A lot of them are now richer from the financial crisis, even though they caused it. Meanwhile, normal people are poorer. Okay, that's not how the system was promised to work. That's not how when the foundations were drawn up, that's not how it was supposed to work. But the wrong people have gotten in power, and they have taken advantage of things, and corruption has taken over, and now people are fighting back against that. But here's the problem. A lot of people can notice that something is wrong, but they can't really put their finger on what the solution needs to be. They're not completely sure. There is no clear consensus on what the solution needs to be. So as a result, people just look at it as things are so bad, so any alternative to what's going on right now must be better. All right, like this is pretty common throughout world history. You can see that people kind of have this mindset that any alternative to what we're seeing right now must be better. And as a result, many people are sitting on the sidelines who are trying to take control or take power. Many people who do not have best intentions for the people, or they really just have intentions for themselves, but they're going to look at this and they're going to see this as an opportunity to really increase their power, because people don't really have the answers. So, and the wrong guys, the ones that we do not want taking power, those are going to be the ones who are going to be the fastest to provide the answers, and that's who people are going to go with. So that is an issue, and that issue is going to get worse, and it could just make these people's issues even worse if we have more of the wrong people getting more power. And then it may change the issue, but there's still going to be a big issue in our world with these protests. And I think at the core, once again, these protests are about our system and making our system more fair. Okay, and that is something that definitely needs to be done, because if you have an unfair system, eventually, it's going to collapse on itself, and then something much worse is going to arise out of that. Usually that's what happens. Okay, that's typically what happens. So what you need to do is you need to make the corrections so it doesn't get to that level. And I think, once again, the main criticism is there are people who are getting extremely rich for producing no value. Okay, they're getting, like, a lot of people in the financial services industry, for example, are getting very, very rich. They're making a ton of money while seemingly providing no value. In fact, in some cases, hurting people. And then you have other people who are working very hard and doing many great things, but are barely able to survive. And this is happening on a wide scale. Okay, there's a lot of people doing a lot of good things but can't survive, and then there's a small group of people who aren't really doing anything very good, and they're getting extremely rich. I think, and the only way this is possible is you have corruption. Okay, you have corruption that is ruining the incentives that are supposed to incentivize people to want to do good things. So there's no longer a real incentive to want to do good things when now there's a way to kind of game the system for yourself and do unproductive things, take speculative risks, and get extremely rich and get bailed out if you fail. But by working hard and doing good things, you end up just poor with barely anything and barely able to survive. So the incentives that you hear about that are supposed to push people to serve everybody else have been broken down by corruption. And this right here is going to cause many more issues down the line. And another thing about these protests is these protests are only going to make the economic issues worse. Okay, because you have governments who are already strained by these economic problems. They're already, they're trying to stop these slowing economies, and now they're about to be strained by these protests. So they have these two things. They have protests, they have people who are angry at them, and then they also have slowing economies. So that's just going to make it harder for them to try to boost the economy, because they also have to tend to the needs of the people who are extremely angry, and there's a lot of violence, and it's something that you can't just ignore. So that's gonna lead to more economic problems, and more economic problems will lead to more protests, and it's kind of a downward cycle into complete mayhem. And that's what's happening in many cities, many major cities across. I mean, we're talking places like London and Hong Kong. Like these are top financial centers. It may not quite be happening in the U.S. yet, but don't be surprised. Once it starts, it doesn't stop until something extremely big happens. Okay, and so the more of these things that start, that kind of gives you an idea for how big this extremely big event in the future is going to end up being. All right, anyway, when it comes to like solving this problem, I think we need to really take steps to rearrange the incentive system so people are not incentivized to do dumb things and still be able to get rich off of it. And it goes back to our core principles, which is, if you want to get rich, well, you need to provide value for others. You need to do things that really make the lives of the people around you better. Okay, you can't just in some cases hurt other people and still make a lot of money. And we also need to create a solid foundation to where people can have a decent living. Okay, now not everyone's going to have the same lifestyle. Some people are going to live better than others. Some people do more than others. That's a simple fact. Okay, but you also do not want to have a situation where you have some people doing great things who are working very hard and can barely get by. If you have that, people are going to be mad, and those good things that they're doing are not going to be done anymore. Instead, they're going to start fighting back. And when they start fighting back, once again, something much worse can a lot of times arises out of that. Because once again, the reason why is that you have people who are willing to take advantage of other people's anger and use that emotion to build their own power. And that always happens. That happens so much, and it probably will happen again, and we're gonna have to learn from it again. So anyway, that's today's episode of the More Knowledge Show. I'll see y'all next week. I will see y'all next week, I promise. All right, I'm not gonna lie to y'all this time. No more excuses. We're gonna continue to get better. All of that. Anyway, goodbye.